All right. Well, we are back from a long hiatus. This is the latest episode of the Grim Wisdom Podcast. Idea, as always, is we're going to enlighten you, and you're not going to enjoy it. With me today is Janine Calkin. She is a candidate for Rhode Island State Senate down here in Warwick, and I'm at her just amazing house. She was kind enough to host the podcast today, so hopefully we should have a good show for you. We're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about journalism in America. There was a John Oliver piece over the weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about. There was also a Projo article. Projo being the paper of record here in Rhode Island for those of you who are out-of-state listeners. And I want to talk a little bit about that too. We're also going to discuss Janine's campaign and some of her experiences as a candidate. You know, having been a remarkably bad candidate myself. Not to say that Janine is, but I certainly was. And having knocked on my fair share of doors, I can certainly sympathize with some of the war stories I'm sure we'll be hearing in a moment. So hopefully it should be a good show for you. So yeah, Janine, you want to say anything else to introduce yourself?
Oh, thanks for coming out today. I really appreciate it. Having never done anything in the political arena, running for office or anything, I'm learning every day, and I'm grateful to people like you that are willing to come and speak to people like me who need to get their message out there. So thanks for that.
Well, I'm sure my 5 listeners will really appreciate your message, but I wouldn't want to give you any false impression that I matter, that any of this is that consequential. I'm not a thought leader, quote unquote. You can't see me, but I'm doing the air quotes. So. But thank you for having me. So I thought we'd start off by talking a little bit about, actually I want to change the order up from what we talked about a moment ago. Let's start off by talking about your campaign and specifically your opponent, Bill Walaska. I always like to say it rhymes with asshole, but can I say that on the podcast? Right? But I recently saw a mailer that he put out where he had this long list of progressive policy goals that he had supposedly worked for, and it was kind of convincing. If you didn't know anything about the guy at all, or what a complete putz he is, then you might actually be deluded into believing that he's, quote, one of the good ones, unquote, when in reality nothing could be further from the truth. So tell us about your priorities as a candidate in the legislature and how you would draw that distinction between yourself and your odious opponent.
Sure. So one of the reasons, and we can talk about it later or not, but one of the reasons I got into this whole thing was because, over the past year, I worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I felt very strongly about, his positions and where he stood on different things. And, he asked people to get involved and to run. And over the last year, I actually had a lot of people asking me to run for office. So here I am today, but some of the things that are really important to me, number one being income inequality. I think that we're in a situation now where kids growing up today have it harder and harder to try to do as well as their parents. Before when we were growing up, it was kind of common that you could, if you worked hard, you could do pretty well. You could go to college, you could get a good job. And unfortunately, it seems like that's harder and harder today in an environment where all these forces are coming together to keep the money up at the top levels, whether it's the corporations or the rich. So I'd like to be able to, at least within Rhode Island, try to bring things back into balance. So that's obviously something I care very deeply about. I also care very deeply about the environment here, especially in Warwick. We've got, this great resource. We've got the bay, and we need to make sure that we protect it. And, there's no reason to continue to invest money into things like fossil fuels when we can promote green energy. So that's something I also feel very strongly about. We should be investing in more turbines and solar and geothermal and tidal. There's no reason that you could, create a lot of jobs in those areas if we actually put the efforts there. And then finally, I want to do things like protecting seniors and the people who don't really have a voice to speak out, and ensure that they're taken care of. Because, we spent the last few decades taking very good care of the people who don't really need it, and we need to bring that back into balance. When I walk around the city, I talk to a lot of people who just feel like I was saying, they don't have a voice. Unfortunately, I've talked to some people who are afraid of losing their homes because they haven't received things like increases in their Social Security, or now they're paying taxes and things like that. And just want to look out for them and try to be a voice for them, in the General Assembly. So those are kind of my 3 top issues anyway.
Well, I think there's a lot in there that I wanted to talk about now that you bring a lot of that up. I think we should a good place to start obviously is income inequality and the national political climate. Whereas it really feels like the 2 major parties are in complete agreement on one point: inequality must continue to grow. And the environment may or may not be important, but it certainly can't be allowed to impede capitalist profits, right? No oil or gas or any other burnable substance can be left in the ground simply on the grounds of it being, a danger to the planet, right? And I would say that to those voters who you're encountering, who feel disempowered and feel like they have no voice, yes, they're right. Yeah. They have no voice. And it's interesting too, because the politicians there, it would be very tempting, I think, to view them as just out of touch, right? It's you hear a lot of times, especially from people who are political insiders, like talking heads on TV, that politicians are simply out of touch, right? Because that is a position that allows you to not despise a particular politician, but simply see them as, they just need to be educated or brought into touch with this one thing or the needs of ordinary Americans, whatever the hell that means. Mm-hmm. And in practice, they're not out of touch. They're deliberately committed to class warfare, essentially, or to widening inequality, no environmental standards. We've seen this with obviously the I don't want to get too far off track because there's a lot to cover today, but we talked about the national politics. It was interesting how during the primary, Hillary Clinton, it started out being for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then after tremendous opposition from the Democratic base, and after poll numbers indicated she might actually lose, she reversed herself and said, now I'm against the TPP. And literally the instant she secured the nomination, I'm for it, let's put it in the platform, we're definitely going forward with it.
It's right? Very scary, yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, scary is, but part of the problem is, I think, too, that people respond with fear when they should respond with anger. It's called fight or flight, because you can't really have both of those emotions at the same time. One of them always predominates. Yeah. And the American public has become so used to, for decades, for probably hundreds of years, from all evidence I can find, politicians simply motivate based on fear. It's very straightforward. Find the fear button and push it, right? And in essence, that's Hillary Clinton's entire case right now, is that we should all be afraid of Trump. In Trump's case is that we should all be afraid of minorities. And either way, I'm tired of being pushed. Personally, I'm tired of being pushed into a place where I'm voting for people based on fear. But we also see that at the local level, where people talk about, well, if you don't let me write this check to rich people, then the bridges will fall down, or there won't be any more jobs ever again. And Rhode Island, I think, is particularly shell-shocked from just years of economic mismanagement by people who are at best inept and more commonly actively corrupt. I think, for example, there was some news recently about how this has been a pretty big year in the markets, without getting into detail of financial markets. If you just invested in index funds, you would have made a lot of money this year with your investments. But our pension fund has lost money this year because our governor decided, while she was treasurer to put it all into hedge funds. And our new treasurer, despite his comments that we have on tape from the Progressive Dems, hasn't really done much to curb that. And so as a result, we have, and I don't want to be totally unfair to him, some of that is contractual BS where, to withdraw the investment from the pension fund would cause a contract battle. But the bottom line is the Rhode Island pension funds have lost a tremendous amount of money. And anyone could have predicted that. Many people did predict that. Hedge funds were just not a good way to go. There was plenty of evidence for it, but the politicians ignored us. And it's not because they were out of touch, it's because they knew and didn't care, right? The priority was giving money to people that are going to be in a position to give campaign contributions later on. And
unfortunately, it's the people who lose,
right.
Again, and just to take a quick step back regarding the TPP, when I mean scary too, I'm referring to the actual TPP itself and what could potentially happen if that thing was enacted. The fact that now corporations can tell or sue local governments or countries, if they don't like the laws that they put in place. People should be really concerned about that, but I know that's a whole separate thing. I encourage everyone to look into what's actually in there and put pressure on, keep the pressure on Hillary Clinton to make sure that she still opposes it and not let her, fall back and, try to flip flop, if you will. On
Well,
that issue.
I think it's too late. I think that ship has sailed. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but that is what the podcast is all about, after all. The ship has sailed. She's already going to be for it, and it's kind of like, I remember Sam Bell, former. He's going to love hearing me say this because I love to tease him about it, but former guest on the podcast here, a friend of mine. A few months ago, Hillary Clinton was floating a short list of VP candidates that had Elizabeth Warren on it. And he said, I think she'll pick Warren because she wants to shore up her position with progressives. And I said, Sam, her owners will never allow her to pick Elizabeth Warren as VP. And Sam said, oh no, we've done a good job pushing her to less. And he had all these arguments, and I didn't find any of them to have to be at all persuasive because he's just coming from a different analysis than I am, right? From his perspective, politicians to some degree are movable, right? You can think of them as stones, right? They're heavy, but they can be moved with sufficient force, right? And I think of politicians as puppets. If you view their behavior as the behavior of the puppet itself, then you're not understanding how it works. You're not understanding the true dynamic, right? The real power is the people pulling the strings, and that might be a little bit too cynical. I mean, I don't want to suggest that Hillary Clinton understands that she's owned and thinks of herself as a bought commodity. It's more that the combination of the golden threads that are tied to her and her family, and just the natural class prejudices of the super rich, right? Look how she fundraises. She throws parties where lots of rich people show up. Look how she speechifies. She takes big ticket items to speak to people that can write a check, right?
Well, just to throw in something that I heard at the Philly convention was the actual donors, because we were right up against a club section that was full of very high dollar donors, and overheard was the comment about how they were way more important than the actual candidates. Because if you think about it, these are the people who donate the millions of dollars every single year for 20, 30 years or whatever. Candidates only around for, a portion of that.
Right.
So they have to make sure that the donors are kept happy. But,
Right.
Hearing something like that kind of hurts a little bit, because you want to, I have always had maybe a, unrealistic view about democracy in that, I want to, I feel like, the people can make change, and, so it's kind of hard to hear when you see a little bit of the oligarchy and how it works.
Right.
And, but I also think that, we're at a turning point right now, or at least I hope we're at a turning point right now where we can swing it back a little bit toward putting a little bit more power into the hands of the people rather than those with the money. But
And I think, I guess well, we could go down this road. I mean, I've talked before on the podcast about how I think that that gradual shifts of power to the people don't work, because at some point the powerful, they throw out the rule book, right? To them, I'm not making a value judgment here, but to the oligarchs, democracy is a farce used to legitimize their policies, right? That's how they think of it. That's, to them, the purpose of democracy is to provide legitimacy to the architecture that provides them with power, right? And so if you come from the perspective of democracy as a representative form of government where we all collectively make decisions, then A, it's very hard to understand or analyze what actually happens in American politics. But B, setting that aside, let's say that you do meet that threshold. Let's say that you do come to a point where you're starting to gain some local power, where people are starting to get mobilized and angry. The reaction is to terrorize you, right? Is to use a show of force. It's the classic shock doctrine. If you haven't read the shock doctrine yet, you haven't been paying attention to the podcast. But they talk about how you terrorize people with some act of extreme violence, usually actual violence, but it can be economic violence as well. And you terrorize them into a state of shock where they're no longer able to mobilize or resist the rapid disenfranchisement of their rights, of their property, etc. One of the ways that you do this is, like, say, with what happened recently, where the Speaker of the Round House, Nick Mattiello, he really wanted for us to spend $180 million on a new minor league ballpark, right? And he did not get that. And after he was defeated, because over 90% of the state thought it was a terrible freaking idea. Right. After he was defeated, he gave this really petty way of talking about it, almost like you won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore, like self-indulgent, whining baby, which is what we would expect, because he's a stupid bully, right? He's not. He doesn't rule through wisdom. They didn't
expect the people to stand up and
right.
as big as stink. They were just
right.
going to push it through, but
right. And so the next time something ridiculously unpopular wanted to get done, they learned from the rest and they just blitzkrieged it through, right? And so we have the tolls, which everybody is against.
Yeah.
And
definitely hear a lot about that.
Yeah, and everybody was against it, and may not even end up going through. But so the lesson that they learned is not, we need to involve the people in the process. The lesson that they learned is we need to work harder to sidestep or circumvent democracy, right? We need to subvert democracy more aggressively, right? And that's certainly the attitude that our governor, who's been a terrible governor by any objective standard, but she's been good at one thing, which is sending money to people in a position to donate to her, why she was able to get this undemocratic, unaccountable, shadowy organization to be in a position to essentially write big checks to rich people. And we even met, I was part of the Progressive Dems, we managed to get a meeting a month and change ago, managed to get a meeting with the governor's then chief of staff. He's since left. But managed to get a meeting with him, and he had this verbal tranquilizer. He used to keep saying, we had a dialogue with all stakeholders, like that was supposed to calm us down. He said it 8 times. I don't know why. I mean, I know he's a lawyer and that they have these little tricks they do, but that seemed like a pretty stupid trick, it would fool us. But in essence, they talked about all the good work that the governor's Commerce Corporation is working on in terms of economic development. And it's all just writing checks to rich people, to big out-of-state businesses who make promises with no accountability to bring jobs to Rhode Island, right? And we were talking about, instead of, if we want to do more to have solar energy in Rhode Island, and they said, of course the governor wants that, right? Because of course, what's they're going to say? Governor hates solar, right? Nobody would ever say that, even if it were true, right? Because everybody likes solar. So they said, oh yeah, we're trying to get large companies to relocate their manufacturing plants here. And it's like, that's not what you want to do. You want to stimulate on the demand side. You want to start, instead of taking all that money and just writing checks to big companies, why don't you make a grant available to anybody who gets rooftop solar done, right? You know, or to defray the cost, and you can even add an income test, right? So that everybody around will get something, but the poorest people who can least afford it are in the position to get it, right?
Right.
You know, and you could even put in, gosh, this is a radical idea. You could even put in where if a landlord does it, then the tenants have to get some sort of a break. You know, the landlord can't absorb all the profit himself, even though he will get some profit. I should say he or she, but let's face it, the landlord is usually he, because men unfortunately do control more wealth than women.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, though. Like, I think the way, you know, we need to turn it from all this, what can we do, you know, how can we write these big checks to these big corporations, and take a look at it from a different perspective and say, well, there's another way of doing it. There's a better way of doing it. You know, giving incentives for people to get solar panels, or, you know, to make it so that they put them up and they can sell back the electricity, or things like that, I think need to be looked at even more so than just writing a check to some
absolutely.
corporation, or trying to get them to come here, you know, and build a few parts here or whatever.
Right. Well, it's not really advanced economics, you know, but you know, it's very easy for me to say, hey, it's just demand side economics. If you create demand, then the market finds a way to fill that demand. That's not a hard concept for people to understand. You can explain that to the average person, and they're pretty much immediately involved in it. But none of the people involved in this economic development have any background in economics. They're all lawyers and business degree dirtbags, right?
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, I for a short time I was studying economics at URI, and one of the things that I talk to people about all the time is this whole concept of the job creators, right? Like, everyone thinks like the corporations are job creators. Some CEO is going to create jobs, and we need to like give them all these incentives to want to create jobs. And I tell them that that's like the complete opposite of what is true. Any large corporation is going to try to cut jobs in order to make more money,
Right.
and to give it back to the shareholders. What creates jobs? The real job creators are all of us, the people who
Right.
spend the money, that buy the products, that increase demand. I mean, anyone who's taken, you know, just a
Exactly.
general economics class can grasp this. And I just think it's so funny that, you know, there are people out there who push that other side of it, that, you know, they're so wrong. And it's like, you know, one of the things I really believe in is, you know, some major increases to the minimum wage. Because if the people at, you know, the minimum wage, they get that extra money, they're going to spend that in the community. You know, they're going to buy more clothes. They're going to go to dinner more often. They're going to buy more cars or be able to afford a house. All of that is going to go right back into the local economy, and it's going to stimulate corporations to make more products and to sell more goods and make more money. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really not. The problem is it's not hard to understand. But if economics to you is just a way to justify a predetermined agenda, right? Then obviously you're going to find a way not to see it. So it's easy for me to say, well, obviously companies are going to always seek to meet demand with creating as few jobs as possible, right? If you give them a check, they're going to find a way to distribute that check to the shareholders as best they can, right? The only way that you can get them to create jobs is to create a demand that they need to meet, right? And then if they don't meet that demand, someone else will, right? So if you want to do anything on the supply side, you should be doing things to lower the barriers to legitimate small businesses, right? Not businesses that claim to be small, where it's a family with only one owner, but it's worth $10 million, right?
Right.
But actual small
like
businesses.
less than 50 employees.
Right. Like if you have less than 50 employees, if you have 4 employees, you're still much bigger than the majority of small businesses, because most small businesses have either 1 or 2 employees, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So you know, if you really want to stimulate small business, then you need to funnel it towards those people, right? But again, the government isn't interested in that, because the predetermined conclusion is that inequality must increase. So when you're having an argument with lawyers and you're trying to enlighten a lawyer about demand-side economics. Well, any high school graduate that you meet on the street can grasp it in about 20 minutes, but a lawyer has paid not to grasp it, and so he will refuse to grasp it, right? It's just that simple. And the only other people who refuse to grasp it are experts in the field, who are essentially career shills who have been paid very well to push a entirely supply side, entirely writing checks to businesses mentality. But so this is I think one aspect of how we're all screwed is this heightening inequality and the total subversion of the political system by powerful interests. And I talked, I want to just put in a little booster for myself. I wrote a little article, which I sent to every newspaper. Nobody published it yet. I'm going to edit it and resend it again this week. I'm going to keep sending it until those bastards publish it. But I did get it on RI Future about the official endorsement process of the Democratic primary, which is another example we talked about earlier, where here in Rhode Island, there is a party machinery that doles out the official party endorsement.
Yeah.
And most people are like, what the hell does that even mean? Why do I care about that? Well, the official party endorsement gives you three things. It gives you top billing on the ballot,
And the little star.
and a little star next to your name, and it gives you access to a broad variety of Democratic Party resources, right? So you get access to Voter Access Network and a few other things that if you're not the officially endorsed candidate, that you can't get on your own, or you have to pay through the nose for,
Yeah.
right? Because these things aren't cheap. So the point is it matters, right? And you should read the article, but the bottom line is there's a process that is supposed to be fair for how they're doled out, and it's completely not fair, and it's revocable essentially at the whim of the chair of the Democratic Party, who is a tool appointed by Nick Mattiello. I'm not even going to say his name because he's a grubby little man, and he's just not important, right? He's just some piece of garbage that his corruption hasn't yet been uncovered. But I'm sure his day will come, as will Mattiello's. But the point is, this official endorsement process, it controls these resources. There is a formal process by which an ordinary person can try to get the endorsement. In most places, that formal process has simply been subverted. And the people that make that determination are already beholden to the pre-selected candidate, right? Either by virtue of being family members, longtime friends, or in some cases employees, right? But even if you manage to get around them, even if you manage to go to this organization and win it, or if you get your people to run for this organization and then they endorse you in their turn, right? Even if you do all that, then
They can still override.
they can still override you because the most important thing is that Nick Mattiello should get to choose everybody who is in the State House, right? Because again, it's not about the substance of participatory democracy; it's about legitimizing the decisions of the ruling class, even when they're opposed by a massive majority of the Rhode Island of the people who were supposed to make the decisions. So.
That was very clear in Finn's case, right?
Yeah, Linda Finn. Yeah, so Linda Finn, obviously in the article, she won the endorsement of both of the towns that comprise her district. Both the town committees endorsed her, but the state endorsed her opponent anyway because
Right.
Linda Finn is too progressive, right? And then your opponent, Alaska. I'm sure a lot of these scumbags are doing this. Alaska put out a mailer not too long ago in which he touted himself as a champion of progressive values because he worked on the minimum wage and a bunch of other things. And it's all, I mean, I don't even want to say it's lies because it doesn't rise to the level of lies.
Well, you can spin almost anything.
Right. It's more like the truth has been tortured until it'll say anything. Right. So he said he worked to get the minimum wage raised. Well, the minimum wage was raised and he voted for it, as did everybody.
Right.
It was raised by $1, which is far less than was demanded and is only a very modest increase to the lives of minimum wage earners. Mm-hmm. Not that it's meaningless, but it was a very small minimum wage increase. And similarly, the minimum wage for tip workers also only went up by $1, which they make $2.83, so now they're gonna make $3.83. Wow.
That's insanity.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to say, well, everybody should get the same minimum wage, but a lot of the lawyers that work in the State House also own restaurants, I guess. So anyway, the bottom line is their initial proposal for a minimum wage increase was a quarter, and it couldn't any.
I'd like to see them live on minimum wage, never mind just an increase of a quarter.
Well, I don't even think income matters too much to these people because most of them are sitting on a big pile of family wealth anyway, right? But, it's like, what's a good example? So, every so often you'll see people do the food stamp diet, right? And they'll talk about how hard it was, but those are the same people that do it for 1 month and then quit.
Right.
Right. And they're living in their nice house, they're still living their same lifestyle, right? And it's like, imagine if you were living on the food stamp diet, but also you had housing insecurity. Also, you were worried about your heat getting turned off because conservative Democrats and Republicans have conspired together to gut heating assistance, right? I mean, something as simple as heating your home, right? And their solution to that is just make shutoffs illegal for a period of time. Well, that's great and all that you can't shut off people during the winter, but as soon as the winter ends, two things happen in short order. The company reports record profits, and a bunch of people get shut off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not a solution to just legislate it, right? To just make it illegal to shut off people for a window of time, right? You need to actually provide them with economic support,
Right.
in order to heat their houses. And you look like you want to say something. So.
No, I was just saying, even just getting back to what was he supposed to do? Vote the increase down, and of course, the optics of that, if he's thinking in his mind, well, I can't vote against, the increase to the minimum wage because it will look bad. Well, yes, it would look bad, but you know what? What you should be doing is fighting to make it even larger or to make it stronger. By doing the bare minimum. We're tired of the bare minimum, and that's what I think a lot of people are really getting frustrated about, because our politicians will do things like send out a mailer that says, yes, I fought to increase the minimum wage. But did you really?
Right.
How hard did you really fight?
They fought hard to prevent the minimum wage from getting raised, and then in the end they voted for it.
Right.
And you can prove. In Wolasta's case, this is easy to prove because he voted against. There was a bill that revoked the right of cities and towns to determine their own local minimum wages, because there was a bill that was close to passing in Providence that would have raised the minimum wage just for hotel workers to $15 an hour, right? And it looked like it had some potential of passing, and it would have been terrible optics because it was liable to pass city council and the mayor would have been obliged to veto it. And the mayor did not want to be forced to veto it, so he got the legislature to take that burden off his hands, right, by making it illegal. And they all have this nonsensical, mealy mouth, well, I just don't think cities and towns should be setting their own minimum wages because there should be one standardized policy. And it's that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Why even have local governments if they can't legislate something that basic, right? So, but anyway, I think we talked a lot about these issues. I think this is a fun conversation, but there was a few things I definitely wanted to cover today because they're timely. So let's talk about, and we've covered a lot of this stuff on the podcast before. I mean, I'm sure if you're one of my 4 listeners, I'm sorry to always rant about the same thing, but until inequality stops destroying humanity, then we should talk about that. Oh, and one other thing too, I just remembered earlier you mentioned sources of energy, and here's another good example. So one of the problems with the minimum wage issue and the mailers like that is that voters, they exist in a low information environment, and you can't put that on them because it's harder and harder to find legitimate information about these things. And the pressures that are put on the American worker are higher every year. You have to work harder and harder. So if you're working 40 hours a week and trying to raise a family, and going to Little League and all these other things, you just don't have time to get educated about these things unless it's a personal passion of yours. You might watch the nightly news, and every so often something good makes it on the nightly news, but usually the nightly news is just puppies and kittens. Yeah. Right. I mean, Channel 12 did us a great service earlier this year because they exposed Carnivale in Providence, this guy who didn't live in his district, and hadn't lived there for a number of years, and they filmed him, and they basically proved it. And the upshot of all that was, after a long fight, we eventually got him kicked off the ballot. So thank God for democracy there. And it does show the power and importance of journalism too.
But the problem with that too is now that's an example, and they can say, okay, we did good, and kind of smooth over the rest of the corruption that's going on. You know what I mean? Like if you have like, one of the criticisms that I hear is that, it was great, wonderful that we highlighted that one particular case, but we should also continue to shed the light on other things that are happening,
Right.
and not just say, all right, we did our job, let's go.
Right. I
on
mean,
to
it's funny,
puppies
even
and
in
kittens
this
now.
year where it's been a huge, we've had a couple of really high profile scandals that were broken by members of the news media doing investigative journalism. We've still had reporters cut. There was a reporter, the Projo cut their State House reporter.
Yeah.
Even in this climate where these big stories broke and were on everybody's lips, So it really is sort of disheartening, and that plays into journalism, which we're going to talk about a little later. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about low information. So, for example, you hear a lot of environmentalists talking about how great deep water wind is. Just so you know, the podcast listeners, a few years ago, National Grid managed to get a big rate increase. And their excuse for that was they were going to be experimenting with this new deep water wind turbine thing. They were going to build like a pilot program. So they're going to build like, I don't know how many turbines, a small number, not enough to be a legitimate generation source for Rhode Island, but they were going to do this thing to see what could be done with this deep water wind, And of course, in order to finance this boondoggle, they needed to put like a 17% rate hike on people, which they did. So National Grid got their rate hike and reports record profits. National Grid being the local electricity provider, of course. And they also get this good PR thing of we're at the cutting edge of environmental sciences. Well, the irony and the frustration of that is that shallow water wind is proven technology, right? It's essentially off the shelf. There are companies that specialize in doing it that have a good deal of experience. There are some tremendously valuable fields where shallow water wind could be installed, but rich people are worried about damaging their property values because it's a view, and so the rich people won't allow that.
Yeah.
They won't permit the development of shallow water wind, no matter how liberal or conservative they claim to be. When it comes right down to it, they're not concerned about climate change if it means they have to sacrifice anything, right? And but the real irony is that you talk to many environmental people, and this is an easy case to make, but they haven't heard it before, and they're so gung-ho about environmental issues. They're like, yeah, I support this deep water wind. And I'm like, if you say you're supporting deep water wind, you're supporting like this Orwellian double standard where we say we're going to solve the problem, but we're not at all. It's like almost as bad as saying that natural gas is a bridge fuel, right? Mm-hmm. So the problem is in a low information environment, where essentially the country has had weaponized ignorance inflicted on them for decades or generations in order to keep them fearful so that their reactions at the polls can be driven to confer legitimacy to a predetermined agenda, right? When you have that whole architecture, like you can't just easily unmake the whole system, right? You can't just point out to people, well, I know Alaska says he's for the minimum wage, but actually he fought as hard as he could against it, and then he voted for the final bill. But here's the proof of all the times he fought hard against it, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the classic. I'm sure this has happened in your district as well. But David Norton up in Pawtucket, he's on top of this situation where his opponent loves taking pictures of him writing game show checks through the community grants program, but meanwhile he's cutting Medicaid, right? I mean, the state budget, which he voted for, and significantly did not speak out against, because you could have, somebody certainly could have voted for the budget as an imperfect result of compromise and still spoken out against the more odious components of the budget, like the Medicaid cuts. But when they cut Medicaid, they cut it by like $170 million, and you can't cut Medicaid by $170 million without dropping bodies. It's just not. Right. There's just not that much fat to cut, right? Yeah. And the people who most need Medicaid are seniors without wealth who need long-term care, right? So they go on Medicaid. The state pays for their nursing homes, right? Or other assisted living. I mean, they've gotten a little better about that part of it, about allowing for in-home care. So that part of the system is being improved. But the baseline funding, nothing happens without the money, and it still gets more expensive every year.
Right.
Right. And so to cut money from the Medicaid program, it's like a slap in the face to seniors, especially people living in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, right? And so just the absolute cynicism, and it's so despicable to cut the budget indirectly of a nursing home by a couple of $1 million, and then to come in there with a check and do a photo op and get everyone to love you because you're supporting seniors. It's so cynical and so contrary to the very idea of democracy. I don't know that anything can inspire me with more more bitterness and anger than that, really.
Yeah, I think, as we walk around the city too, when I talk to voters, and I let them know even my opponent's record, they have no idea that he has an A+ from the NRA. They have no idea that he's pro-life. They have no idea that
Right.
he voted to cut the top tier Rhode Island income tax. Of course, they're not going to shed the light on the things that they don't want people to know about.
Yeah.
They're going to just have those pictures of the big checks, where they're giving money that's not really theirs. It's the taxpayers' money to, whatever groups. But, how do we fix it where the people who don't have the time to investigate this type of thing, that's a tough question. More transparency, would be one thing. If we could have a, objective source that made the information publicly available, or, sent out newsletters or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what the fix is, but you're absolutely right in that we need to make sure that people have enough information to hold our elected officials accountable for their actions. Hopefully, and a lot of people haven't been involved in politics because they think, it's all fixed. It doesn't really matter. I can't do anything. And I'm hoping that this year a lot more people are paying attention and they are looking. And then there's websites like votesmart.org and things like that. You can go and look up, what is the voting record of, my elected official, and it will tell you, where they stay. So there's things like that. But yeah,
And there's a problem with that too, and it's another problem we've covered on the podcast before. I don't need to go into too much detail, but my biggest objection to that possible solution is the ease with which those organizations created for that purpose are subverted by money and ambition.
Yeah.
Right? A few years ago, Clean Water Action, under the directorship of somebody named Jamie Rhodes, who, if you ever see his name on anything, you should run the other way, because he's a career climber. He doesn't seem to have any integrity that I can perceive. I just wanted to just bag on him a little bit here in the podcast, because he'll always give you a smile and a handshake, and then as soon as you turn your back, he'll happily stab you in it and then apologize for having to stab you. But it was necessary. It was a necessary sacrifice so that he could become a lobbyist in D.C.
how nice of him.
Yeah. So Clean Water Action, under his direction, endorsed a wetlands violator because he was an incumbent, right, over a strong environmental candidate. And then he worked for Planned Parenthood, who endorsed Raimondo, even after Raimondo had said she doesn't believe in abortion, she's open to abortion restrictions, and ultimately made it essentially required that no plan cover abortion, or that abortions be, that everybody who wants to come up with a plan covering abortion must come up with an identical plan, except that it doesn't cover abortion, which really undermines the idea of the whole health insurance exchange. I mean, you're essentially moving abortion out of the list of things that people can get health care for.
It shouldn't be singled out, and taken out of some plans. Yeah.
Right, and the biggest debate in abortion now, politicians in the Democratic Party who are of a certain stripe, they like to talk about Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade is no longer relevant to the abortion debate in this country, or it's only very, very vaguely relevant. And what I mean by that is abortion restrictions in many states are so onerous that no legal abortions can effectively be obtained there. Right, because the abortion people have gotten smart. They've just figured out, hey, we'll never overturn Roe v. Wade, so let's just bomb abortion clinics and make sure they don't reopen. Let's just add non-medically necessary requirements to abortion clinics so that people can't afford to do them. Let's limit where they can be opened, or let's make sure that none of them can be opened anymore, and then try to shut down the ones that exist, right? And so there's been this realignment of that group of radicals who are radically opposed to abortion in all cases, where they've done a really good job of going around the Constitution, going around Roe v. Wade,
right,
to try to deprive Americans of access to abortion.
and make it a lot more difficult.
And inequality, of course, heightens that, because rich people will always have access to abortion legally, because they can just get on a jet
Right.
and fly to a country with really strong medical privacy laws and no rules against abortion.
Yep.
Right? It's so the core problem, as I would say it, is really just always comes back to inequality for me. But it also comes back to these organizations. So, here's a couple of examples where one ambitious climber betrays all the people who are relying on Clean Water Action for their voting information, betrays all the people who are relying on Planned Parenthood for their voting information, right? And he's still working in politics. I think he's on hiatus now, but I'm sure he'll come back. Shit always floats to the top. So, we'll see him again. And as soon as he gets into an organization, he'll be looking for a way to undermine its message to advance his own career, right? And that's his personal ambition. There's also organizational ambition where, if you're in the driver's seat of a powerful endorsement or a powerful information source, right? And an incumbent says, "Give me your endorsements, or I'll destroy your issue," right? Extorts you for your endorsement, right? Well, then you go and you look at their opponent, who's a challenger, and says, "If I win, I'm 100% on your side.
Right.
I believe passionately in that." Well, if you're a cynical organization, you endorse the incumbent, because you figure, well, the incumbent's more likely to win statistically, and if he wins, he'll burn us down if he possibly can, right? Because we didn't endorse him. Whereas this guy, if he wins, he'll probably forgive us, right?
Right, exactly.
So you make the coward's play, but it's also it's not a play without strategic thought. It's not an totally unjustifiable play. And a lot of unions will justify that as being, well, we have to put the interests of our members first ahead of our own principles. And I understand that. I just think there's been that the system is really good at giving people that devil's bargain. It's really good at making people that have principles and convictions throw them in the trash.
Well, because they have those convictions, right? So even if they, like you were saying, don't get the endorsement or whatever, they're going to do the right thing because that's what they believe in anyway. So
Right.
having the endorsement isn't going to change, what they do. It's just,
Right. And so it becomes a situation where everybody's trying to trade favors because they're coming from a perspective of fear, really. In that example, the organization is afraid that if the incumbent doesn't get endorsed and wins, that they'll cost them something. So, when you act out of fear, you're making bad decisions. And ultimately, I think an electorate that is dominated by fear is, in the long run, just incompatible with the concept of democracy, right? But, I wanted to talk about journalism, but before I do, did you have anything you wanted to say on that?
No, and I think, one of the other, and it actually ties in nicely, is that, not having a lot of information, it really does show the importance of independent journalism, and I'm not sure if you know about this, but I spent, once Bernie said that he was getting into the race, I organized the Rhode Island for Bernie Sanders group, but at the same time, I also helped kick off the Bernie 2016 TV independent YouTube channel. And it was all about, because Bernie wasn't getting any press at the time, we tried to cover as many rallies as we could. We talked about the issues. We would bring in candidates that were running for different offices throughout the country. And it actually did get quite a lot of viewership because people were kind of starving for this information. And I haven't been involved in that for like the last, at least 6 months or so since the primary started. But they're taking it now into a direction now where they want to keep up that pressure on politicians. They're calling themselves Political Revolution TV, but they're, I think what I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of these like independent or smaller organizations that are trying to get the information out, and I like seeing that. I like, your podcast, I would rather read, like RI Future than some of the other, newspapers out there, because it seems like you get more quality information, that's important. So I think that, we could take this into the conversation with John Oliver, but what you're seeing is like, and you can watch the local newscast at 11 o'clock and you're thinking, okay, this is good. This is my local news. And what you don't understand is that that channel is owned by NBC or, whatever.
Right.
And it really comes down to there's 6 corporations that own all of the media, or 95% of the media that's out there, the mainstream media. And not only do they kind of, and John Oliver, did a really great job at kind of highlighting this, but they push the same stories out to all the different cities. So like, there might be one story that they take it to that national level, and then they and the scripts are the exact same thing. I'm not sure if it was Jon Stewart or not, but I think it was. He basically showed different local news channels across the country who had the same exact script. Yeah.
I remember that.
And, unfortunately, that's what we're being fed these days, is this kind of cleaned up and sterilized information that gets pushed out by these 6 corporations to push a message that they want. You know?
I would say, it's both a little bit brighter and a lot bleaker than what you're describing. It's brighter in the sense that I don't really think there is not substantial evidence for massive censorship by the media organizations, right? I mean, there are certainly stories that they just don't cover because they don't find them to be profitable, right? But if a story is profitable, they will cover it. Right. So
it's all about money.
Right. It's all about money. So I don't think that there's a guy saying, there's not a bald dude with a white cat somewhere trying to decide, what Americans are allowed to hear or aren't allowed to hear. It's just a bunch of people at various levels making decisions based solely on profit maximization, without regard to the political agendas of all the players. I think that the stockholders, by and large, are probably Republican because Republicans tend to have more money. But let's say it doesn't matter. Like, I don't think that anybody in journalism or in broadcast news thinks, what should I put out? Because what's going to gratify the shareholders' good feelings, right? Nobody thinks like that, right? NSC doesn't care about that, and I think that their CEO doesn't care about that either. He only cares about how big a check he can take home at the end of the year. Right, and the thing that determines that is profit maximization.
Yeah.
So I think that it's.
And on top of that too, what was it in 1986? The law that was passed that basically you look at MSNBC, Fox, all these things, they are not considered, or they don't have to tell the truth anymore.
Right.
They can't.
Why is
they
it constitutionally protected
yeah,
speech? Yeah.
They are entertainment, and a lot of people don't realize that. They turn on the TV, they watch these shows, and they can basically say whatever they want because it's entertainment. It's not real news.
Right,
Yeah.
and that was going to be my point about why things are so bleak, because what we're seeing is, even when you talk about independent journalism, what you're describing is independent opinion and analysis, right? But opinion and analysis rely on data, right?
Yeah.
And data needs to be gathered by journalists, by reporters,
right?
And if there's no money to pay for reporters, that was kind of John Oliver's point throughout most of the segment, which you should see if you haven't, all 3 of my listeners. But basically his point was that all of the opinion analysis that his people do relies quite often on hard facts that have been produced by a journalist who is paid to simply go to city council meetings and wait for something to happen.
Right.
Try to uncover evidence of corruption, and who isn't necessarily required to always come up with a story for every visit to a city council meeting. And that's just incompatible with the profit motive. There's no way the profit motive will allow that to continue indefinitely, right? Because the profit motive says if you go to a city council meeting, you need a story to come out of that meeting, right? Otherwise, why are we paying you to go to the meeting? So, but then John Oliver, I think he comes off the rails because his thing at the end is that his conclusion, his solution, his resolution is that, well, all of us greedy jerk-offs need to pay for our media, right? Because we're just lazy. We've gotten used to getting it for free, right? And even makes fun of it, like, the guy who's watching this on YouTube from the Wi-Fi he stole from the coffee shop down. And that's funny, and I'm sure that hipster exists, right? But the problem is that, like, most people just don't have any money, right? Or they're under, or to be more broad put, they're on constant economic stress, right? And one fear that everybody who's under economic stress has is anytime you sign up for a recurring payment on your credit card, you are vulnerable to the risk that the company will decide to raise it without warning, right? And cause you to overdraft your account or otherwise screw up your finances. And so even if a website says it's only 99 cents a month, it's like, I don't want to give you my credit card information, period. Because as soon as you raise it, there's no opt-in. It's always opt-out. You're going to get a thing unless you proactively opt out, right? We don't have to aggressively sell you. And so there's whole businesses and whole industries whose entire business model is just that. Get you to agree to a recurring payment and then raise it whenever desired.
I mean, how many times have you got your cable bill or whatever and you're like, wait a minute. This went up. Like,
it just goes up. And you call them and they always have some excuse for it. And sometimes it makes sense, but the point is it's never opt out. It's never opt in, it's always opt out. And so I know there was even a book and some sort of made about it called Gotcha Capitalism, where the idea is to just gotcha people with fees. But the point is, the American consumer is just shell-shocked from getting preyed upon, and you just don't want to give your credit card to an internet website that may or may not have good security so they can bill you every month, right? And then decide at any time to raise you. And then they might send you an email that'll automatically go into your junk folder, right? About letting you know that'll be raised, in addition to a big brick of text about the terms and conditions, right? So it's an unreasonable solution. I would say the real solution is, I don't know why John Oliver missed this, but his home country of Britain, they have the BBC. The BBC is a publicly funded, world-class news and entertainment organization. They put out some of the best and most entertaining television shows and news stories of anywhere. Now, granted, right, any American is going to feel a little bit of fear at the idea of the government running the news organization. But honestly, there isn't a viable alternative to that public funding. If it's a social good, to have this data, to have reporters go to council meetings, but the private sector won't fill it, then the public sector must intervene to fill that need for the public good. That's just how it has to happen, right? And it's unfair to ask us, American consumers, to privatize one more burden at the backs of everybody else, because if we all pay for news, if I go on The Nation and I pay for the subscription to The Nation, I pay for the subscription to this, it's only a matter of time before those people get bought out too, right? And when they get bought out, what happens? Well, my credit card transfers over to the new company and they raise the rates and they trash the journalism and fire all the reporters.
Not only that, but now they have all of your information as well, and you start getting spam emails from...
Right. So the solution, his solution is just not good. It's not workable, right? And it's analogous to the Projo ran a front page story on Sunday. It was, I think, shockingly tone deaf, and it was like almost anti-information. It was designed to make you more ignorant after reading it, because the headline was, we need to convince young, quote, invincibles, unquote, to buy health insurance, right? Because the bottom line is, old people need their health care bills paid for, and so young people need to pay their insurance premiums to subsidize the old people, right? And that was the article's whole thing in there. And the tone of the article and the headline of the article and everything was supposed to get you to think that these young people are simply irresponsible. They don't understand what's going on.
Right.
Here's an alternate theory. They don't want to get screwed again, right? I mean, look at in the last year, I keep talking about this. I don't know why nobody ever talks about this. So Obama released some changes to the Social Security, way Social Security inflation is computed, that basically ensure that I won't get Social Security, nobody younger than me will get Social Security, because our benefits are going to be cut by a third to a half of what they would have been had Obama not changed Social Security. So forget strengthening Social Security. Democrats are busy destroying it, right?
Yeah.
So, and every year they talk about we're going to strengthen Social Security, and that's just code for anyone currently receiving it won't
They'll be
screwed.
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and that's simply not good enough. You know, it's funny how there's a lot of push to talk about a universal basic income. You probably heard some of this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is a very good idea that would work very well if it was ever implemented, and won't be implemented without a tidal wave of blood.
Yeah, here it won't. It would probably be, you'd have to prove it. I think I thought I heard somewhere overseas in Scandinavia they were trying to test it out and see how it worked. But I think, like you said, it's probably not something that's going to happen here anytime in the foreseeable future. But yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of good things about it, but then you always have the people who are like, oh, why should we pay, people to like sit around and do nothing? Like people, one thing that kills me is even with like people who have, bad comments on social programs. It's like, oh, why should I work hard and pay so-and-so can stay home and, watch TV and do nothing all day?
Guess what? You're doing that. You're already doing that.
But
And it's the rich people, not the poor people.
Yeah, but the thing is too, like nobody I know wants to like sit around and just do nothing all day. Most people want to work. They want to feel like they're contributing to society. And if they can't work, then there's a reason they can't work. Due to like this whole idea that people just want to take advantage of the system. Yeah, there might be a few rotten eggs out there, but that is not the majority of people. So this whole thing with the basic income, it sounds like it could be, I obviously have to learn more about it, but maybe it is something that we could look forward to down the road, where at least people are guaranteed to like not be suffering. Children don't have to go hungry, or whatever it is. And I'm sorry if I interrupted you and you wanted to explain more, but I think that as a whole we get stuck in these viewpoints, and it's really like we're never going to make any real progress unless we start opening our eyes. And one of the things I liked about Bernie was he kind of did, like he said, let's take a look at Scandinavia and how they do things. Let's look at this country here and see how they do things. Michael Moore in his movie, Where to Invade Next, was a perfect example of that.
I need to see that.
Oh, it's wonderful, because you take a look at it and you're like, wow, I really like, why am I not living in Italy? They have like such a great life there, but our viewpoints here are so stuck, and people are afraid to look beyond and see what the options are and how we can do things better. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of change in our current government that is looking into how things can be done better. So anyway.
No, I think there's broad consensus across all powerful political actors that things should continue to get worse. The only question is how fast and what way first. I mean, like with the universal basic income, obviously, I don't want to go into too much detail about it because we're sort of running long on time, and I want you to be prepared for our conversation. But I would say that, even if it was proven conclusively that it was a good idea, it would never work here. It's funny because you'll talk to people and they've been so programmed with this, deserving versus undeserving mentality, this idea that there are, even you say like there's a few bad apples. Like, let's take your example. Let's take that as written, that there's a bad apple, so somebody that's unsavable, right? And I'm sure if you knew their life story, you would feel so sorry for them that you wouldn't even care. But whatever, we'll just write that off. I mean, I'm sure there's some completely degenerate people out there, most of whom are probably rich. But let's just say that there's one totally degenerate and
But
unredeemed.
you're starting with the assumption that that people are not good or do not want to do more, which I disagree with. But yeah,
Well, I think so. You're going to meet these people on doors, and I'm sure you have, and you meet these people all the time where they're like, "Well, we need to sort the world into deserving and undeserving. We need to give the deserving resources, and we need to give nothing to the undeserving." And the great one I like, because the right wing has been screaming this anti-human thing for years, and you'll see people parrot it, and it's so heinously evil. Like this way to think about it, they'll say, "Well, yes, it's terrible that children starve, but if we provided food for them, then there would be no disincentive for their parents to have them."
Yeah.
So, the only way we can get people to stop having babies is to
make sure they go.
make sure the babies die horribly.
Yeah, that is ridiculous.
Right. Oh, and by the way, abortion is the worst thing ever. But because usually those people also believe that. But it's so inhuman to say that. That you just can't even reconcile yourself to it. You almost want to just reject the person that says that as a horrible human being, unworthy of your time, right? But there's a lot of people that think that. That's you can make all of the fact-based arguments you want. You can say that for instance with marijuana or drugs or any of the other things, if I wrote somebody a check for $20,000 a year to take care of themselves, right? Then most of these people could. Let's say that 90% of these petty criminals wouldn't. Certainly, drug criminals, So, well, it costs like $55,000 a year to imprison somebody. It's tremendously expensive, right? And of course, a big part of that goes to the stockholders of private prison companies nationwide, not in every municipality, of course. But so, given the choice, let's say that you don't even care about them. Let's say that those people, gungy people, are to you undeserving of your mercy, right? Well, what's the most efficient way to deal with that problem? If you're not prepared to execute them for being dirty, then your alternatives are give them the means to provide them for themselves or warehouse them at tremendously higher expense, right? What's the logical thing to do? But I've given that argument to 100 people and it's failed 100 times. No conservative will ever accept that argument, right? Because they're so preoccupied with punishing people that they're willing to overpay to punish people. It's the same thing with drug tests for welfare, right? Yeah. It's like you can tell people till they're blue in the face, this catches no drug users, right? It actually costs us more than it would cost. It costs us money. It's legally indefensible. It's a violation of the Constitution. And they'll say, yes, but it's worth spending all that money to make sure nobody... And of course, those people invariably think that no one should get welfare, right? Yeah. No one should get support.
It's just a means to basically punch holes into a program.
Right, right. And so, you have a body politic that's been so aggressively, terrorized for so long. They've been told for so long to be driven by fear. They're so used to it, they don't even see it anymore, right? You'll talk to perfectly friendly, liberal, intelligent people, and they'll say, we have to vote for Hillary, and because we have to beat Trump, because he terrifies me, and if you don't agree with that, then you're everything that's wrong with this country, right? It's like, you're just telling me to be terrified because you're terrified. Yeah. Do you not see how that has led us to this point? Right. Ignorance too has led us to this point, right? But ignorance is, I guess ignorance is the natural state of every baby, right? But certainly we don't do anything to cure our citizenry of it. It's much easier to exploit it, right? Even when you're talking outdoors. I know you've had this experience. We talked about it before the podcast, where somebody will say something just so ignorant, right, and so horrible, you don't want, it shouldn't be your responsibility to cure them of their ignorance, right? And where's the percentage for you as a candidate to spend an hour on a door trying to cure somebody of their ignorance, right? It gets you nothing. They're not going to vote for you, right? And they're not going to be cured of their ignorance. It's just going to take you away from talking to other voters, right? Yeah. And so, the system is, there's so many times where people are just like, well, I have to make the expedient choice. I have to let that ignorance go and try to exploit it as best I can, right? So...
Yeah, that's a tough situation when you're faced with something like that, and the only thing you can do is, if it was a family member too, right? You can't come across as trying to tell them, well, you're wrong and here's why, because they'll get defensive and shut down and not want to listen. you know, so you try to reach them in a way that, you know, I don't know, it's a difficult thing, but like if you can encourage them to check out more information on it or something like that, then, but yeah, it's kind of hard. And like you said, especially doing, you know, what we're trying to do, where we're trying to knock on as many doors as we can, because, you know, we've got, you know, an incumbent who's been around for 22 years. It's hard when you're trying to balance, you know, how much time you spend at each door.
Yeah.
So it can be a challenge, but, you know, I try to have faith in humanity and believe that at the end of the day, like maybe it is just overcoming, you know, something that they may have heard from a parent or from a family member, and, you know, maybe if they do look into it a little bit, that they might be able to see why it's wrong, or, you know, maybe change a mind or two, but, yeah, it's a difficult thing.
Well, I think, you know, you mentioned faith in humanity. That's a good place to close on, because here on the Grim Wisdom podcast, I mean, I definitely believe that humanity is worth saving. I just don't know that it can be. So I will leave you with that. Is there anything that you wanted to say before we sign off here, Jean?
No, thanks again for coming out, like I said, and you know, if anyone is in the Warwick area in District 30 and wants to help out with the campaign, you know, feel free to reach out. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and our website is JanineCalkin.com. We'd love to have, you know, any additional help that we can get. So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the I would love for people to prove me wrong. You know, I would love for transformational change to take place as a result of electoral activity. So, you know, if you find my podcast depressing and you think that I'm too bitter and cynical, you know, prove me wrong and go get involved, knock on some doors.
Are you going to have
lazy
more
bastards.
optimists on your show? Maybe?
Well, you know, I'm sure there's a good analogy, but, you know, compared to me, everyone's an optimist, right? All right. Well, thanks again, Janine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening. I apologize for the long hiatus, but we've got a lot of good guests coming up the next few weeks, so stay tuned and have a grim day.